What's up, everybody? Today I am finally here to do my ranking of all of the Goosebumps HorrorLand books. There's a total of 19 books in this series, and it's split up into two different arcs. There's Arc 1, which contains the first 12 books, I believe, and then Arc 2 consists of 7 books. And in each arc, there's like an overarching story that runs throughout these books that kind of like connect the different characters, and they all meet up in Horrorland. And then at the end of each arc, there's like a finale book that has like all of these characters in it that met up throughout the different books, and then they have to try to figure out how to escape Horrorland. And I won't really be covering those sections of the story too much here. I'm mostly just taking into account the main individual stories of each of these books. But I will say, before I jump into the ranking, that I did kind of enjoy this sort of overarching story throughout this series. I like that R.L. Stine tried something a little bit different. It was a bit more experimental. And I had fun with this sort of overarching story overall. It was a little bit lackluster in execution, I think. I think maybe R.L. Stine tried to tackle something that was a little bit too complex and too much going on for what he normally does and what he normally writes, which is basically just, short horror kids novellas. But I enjoyed the concept, and I appreciate the effort, and it was still fun to read through. Some of these sections were better than others, were part of this overarching story. For those of you who maybe aren't too familiar with how that works, with the first arc in the Goosebumps Horrorland series, the main plot of like the individual story for each book takes up the first like 80 to 90 pages of the books. And then there's an additional 30 to 40, maybe 50, I'm not really sure exactly, somewhere between like 30 and 50 pages, where the characters will then go into the Horrorland theme park after like the initial story ends, and then they will meet up with other different characters and different things and be stuck in this Horrorland theme park and have to figure out how to escape, things like that. And then in Arc 2, it starts like a new overarching story kind of, and this one is a little bit different. It actually starts out with the kids, or the characters in Horrorland, and they go to this sort of like shop kind of, where there's just these different collectible items within Horrorland, and the shopkeeper is named Jonathan Chiller, and the kids will like pick out an item, and then they'll leave Horrorland. So the first like 20 to 40 pages or whatever will be the kids in Horrorland, and then the story will continue with like the main individual plot or story for the rest of that book. And then the last book as well in Arc 2 is like the finale and the culmination of that sort of overarching story for each of those books. If that makes sense, I probably didn't explain it the best, but yeah. So just wanted to give my brief thoughts on those overarching stories before I jump into the ranking, because I won't really be taking those into account too much in this ranking, just like the main stories. I might mention them briefly here and there, but yeah. Okay. And then another thing too that I will mention is this will probably be a pretty quick ranking. This is not exactly my favorite Goosebumps series or one of my favorites. But even though a lot of these books I won't have a lot to say about, or I might just sound kind of negative and be given low ratings for, I still enjoyed reading through it overall, and I'm glad I decided to give this series a second chance, because a long time ago, actually a little bit before I got back into Goosebumps and started reviewing and started my YouTube channel and all of this, back when the Horrorland series was new, like 2008, 2009, around there, I tried reading a couple of these new Goosebumps books back at that time to see what they were all about, and I was very, very disappointed in them, and for the longest time I was sort of put off from this series, and I didn't want to go back to it. But I'm glad I decided to give it a second chance and read through, because even though it's definitely not the best, and there's a lot of very mediocre books in this series, I still had a fun enough time reading through it. And I'm also happy to say that I have now officially read every single Goosebumps book in existence, minus the television books. I don't collect the Goosebumps TV special books because, for one, they're not written by R.L. Stine. For two, they're literally just adaptations of a TV episode that was already based on a book. So yeah, though that's something that I really just don't feel the need to collect and to read. It's just, yeah, I don't know. It's not something I really care too much about. Plus, a lot of those TV books are also extremely rare and expensive, and I just don't care to have them. So yeah. But yeah, I've officially read every single Goosebumps book, minus those, and then of course whatever yet comes out in the future for House of Shivers. So, with all of that out of the way, let's jump into the ranking. I have them split up into categories here. The first category is basically bad. I have, thankfully, only like 4 books, I think, like 4 or 5 books in this first category. So out of all 19 books in this series, there's only like 4 to 5 that I would consider genuinely bad books. Like, both objectively, I mean, some of it I guess is personal bias against some of these, but objectively I do not think these books are good at all. And then the next category is kind of like mediocre, mid, like average books, which unfortunately the majority of this series consists of, in my opinion. And then the last category is like good to very good books. No book in this series reached great or like amazing for me. No 5-star books in this series, unfortunately. But yeah, those are my categories. With that out of the way, let's jump into it. Enough rambling. So, starting out in the bad category, my least favorite Goosebumps book, or my least favorite Goosebumps HorrorLand book, I should say. Actually, this probably is my least favorite Goosebumps book of all time. I'm not going to lie. Is Dr. Maniac versus Robbie Schwartz. This is book number 10, or I'm sorry, not number 10, number 5 in the series. And yeah, this book is horrible. I absolutely hate everything about this book. This somehow even got a couple of sequels with Dr. Maniac Will See You Now from the Most Wanted series, as well as They Call Me the Night Howler from the Goosebumps Slappy World series. They're all kind of bad in my opinion, but I think this might be the worst one. This book is just a bunch of random nonsense. More fake out scares, cliffhanger chapter endings. It was all a dream. Chapters where stuff would happen and it would turn out to just be a dream or fake. The entire book is that. And yeah, this book is just horrible. I'm not even going to waste my breath with it. This is the worst piece of crap I've ever read in Goosebumps. This book is a complete abomination. And if it wasn't for me being a completionist and wanting to collect all these and need them all in my collection, I would rip this book in half right now in front of the camera. This book is absolute garbage. Yeah, that's Dr. Maniac versus Robbie Schwartz. It gets a flat 1 out of 5 stars. Worst Goosebumps book I've ever read in my life. Enough said. Okay, coming in at number 18 on my ranking. Not really that far above Dr. Maniac, to be honest. This is the very first book in the HorrorLand series, and that is Revenge of the Living Dummy. And I think this was the first, or one of the few Goosebumps HorrorLand books I read way back in the day that kind of put me off from the series. And it's because I started out on ones like this that were just absolutely terrible. And this is probably the worst Slappy book out of... R.L. Stine has tons of Night of the Living Dummy and Slappy books. You have a Goosebumps series dedicated to them, for goodness sake. Like, there's so many Slappy books, and this is... It's saying something to be the worst one. And in my opinion, that's what this is. One thing that I will mention, I'll just mention it now, is one thing that I think hurts these books is kind of a negative, not just for this one, but the majority of this series, is them only being like 80 to 90 pages long, cutting out that page space and making these books a lot shorter than your average Goosebumps story, whereas, you know, the average one being like 120 pages in length, it really does hurt the story. It cuts out a lot of stuff. They feel very rushed. This one, of course, feels that way along with most of these others, as I said. And I think what really sucks about this book, though, is this one just feels super childish. Slappy in here is known as like Mr. Bad Boy, and he has like really cringy dialogue and phrases, and he says things like, "I'm a bad boy." And yeah, this book, I'm not even going to get into all that. This book is just super cringy. It's super childish. It's not good. It gets a 1.5 out of 5 stars. That's Revenge of the Living Dummy. Comes in at number 18 on my ranking. Like I said, I'm going to try to go through these pretty quick. I'm not going to give like detailed plot synopsises or anything like that for these books. I'm just going to kind of share my thoughts on them and yeah, give my ratings. All right, this one is not much better. We're still in the bad category. This is number 17 on my ranking, Weirdo Halloween, book number 16 in the HorrorLand series overall. And this is the only one in the series that's a special edition. And basically what that means is this book is longer than typical and way longer than it needs to be. Let me see. This book is my goodness. 214 pages. This is one of the longest Goosebumps books ever written, and it does not need to be that long. This book is horrible. It's basically about this alien that you see here on the cover. His name is Bim, I think. And basically these kids are trick-or-treating, and they stumble across this alien named Bim. At first they think it's like some little kid dressed up in a costume or whatever. And this alien like follows them around and like wants to be their friend and says all of these weird things and acts like he wants to be their friend at first and acts like he's going to serve the kids and do whatever they want. And the kids soon learn that he's a real alien because he does some weird things that only an alien could do. And then the alien starts to show his sort of more evil side, I guess, and he starts wanting the kids to be his slave, and he starts giving the kids orders, and he says things like, rub Bim's back. Bim likes it when you rub his back. Bim wants to feel happy. And if you don't make Bim happy, Bim will be mad, very mad. And then the kids insult him, or they don't do what he says, and then Bim like grows larger and turns into like this giant monster creature. And yeah, that's basically a weirdo Halloween. This book was awful. Bim is perhaps the most annoying character or monster that I've ever had the displeasure of reading about in one of these books. Like, just extremely obnoxious. The things he says, the dialogue, the way that he talks, it is extremely annoying. And it drags on for almost 200 pages. Well, this book is split up into 3 parts, and I will admit that the last part doesn't really have anything to do with that main story. The last part of the book, the kids like go to HorrorLand, and it's sort of like the HorrorLand arc, kind of. But yeah, this book just sucked. This one also gets a 1.5 out of 5. I don't have anything else to say about it. That's Weirdo Halloween. Okay, coming in at number 16 on my ranking, and this one, again, it isn't really much better. That is Welcome to Camp Slither. This is book number 9 in the series. And I'll just say that this is the worst camp book that R.L. Stine has written. He's got quite a few of those as well. Welcome to Camp Nightmare, Ghost Camp, Return to Ghost Camp, Creature Teacher Final Exam even is a camp story. He's got quite a few camp stories within this franchise. And this is easily the worst one. This book is horrible. I don't even remember much about it, to be honest. All I remember is that this one, also like Weirdo Halloween, has some kind of cringy dialogue in it. Except it comes from the main characters, the kids themselves, instead of like the monster or whatever. I remember this book being very predictable and just kind of uneventful and boring throughout. Nothing really happens until like the final act of the book. Yeah, I don't even remember a lot about this book. I just remember thinking it sucked. So yeah, Welcome to Camp Slither. I gave this one a 1.75 out of 5. Okay. Coming in at number 15 on my ranking is Slappy New Year. This is book number 18 in the series. This is the second to the last book in the HorrorLand series. And this one is a little bit of a step up from those first few that I talked about, but not much. I also gave this one a 1.75 out of 5. And this book isn't necessarily as bad. I wouldn't objectively say this is like a horrible book or anything, which is why I put it a slight step above those ones. But I really did not enjoy this at all. This is basically a complete rehash of the first 3 Night of the Living Dummy books from the original 62 series. If you put those 3 books in like a blender together, like just combine all of their elements and like pulled something random out of it, like the culmination of those books, that's what you get with this one. There is literally not a single thing in this book that has not been done previously in Night of the Living Dummy. And that is the reason I just did not get anything out of this at all. Again, it's not a completely horrible book, but I just did not care for it. It gets a 1.75 out of 5, and it comes in at number 15 on my ranking. Okay, we are now moving on to the category of like kind of mediocre, slightly below average books. These are books that I don't completely hate. They're not terrible like those first few that I talked about, but they're still just kind of meh and whatever to me. So yeah. Coming in at number 14 on my ranking is Little Shop of Hamsters. This is book number 14 in the HorrorLand series. Oh, that's ironic. It's number 14 on my ranking, and it's also number 14 in the series. Okay. And yeah, this is also one that was just very uneventful. There's like nothing that happens throughout the majority of this book. It's basically about our main character that I think he wants a hamster for a pet, but his parents won't let him have one because they don't think he's responsible enough. And so he gets this part-time job, I think, working at like this pet store that has all of these hamsters. And I think that if he proves he's responsible, then his parents will let him have one, keep one as a pet. And I just remember nothing happening like this entire book. Like, it's literally just him going to this pet store and working, and the hamsters break loose. And then at the very, very end, the hamsters like grow giant. They eat some kind of something. I don't even remember what it was. They eat some type of food or something. I don't know. And the hamsters grow giant. It basically turns into a Monster Blood 2 ripoff where you have like Cuddles the giant hamster attacking the kids. Yeah. I did not care for this book. I gave it a flat 2 out of 5 stars. Yeah, not completely terrible, but I just did not care for this. This book was completely just whatever to me. So yeah, it's a little shop at hamsters. Okay, coming in at number 13. This one also gets the next. I'll just say it now. The next few books all get like a flat 2 out of 5 stars. So the next one in my ranking, coming in at number 13, is Wizard of Ooze. This is book number 17 in the series. And one thing I will say about this one is I really do like this cover. I like the colors and this sort of like ooze-looking creature. And this one is kind of like a comic book superhero type story where you have this villain called the Ooze, and he's basically this walking toxic sludge monster that when he touches you or touches objects, it like dissolves them or like melts them like acid. And I will say, the one positive I have for this book is I really like that concept. I think that's pretty cool. I'm typically not into this sort of subgenre of books dealing with like comic book and superhero type things. But I really like the concept for the villain. The Wizard of Ooze is pretty cool. The rest of the book, the story, the execution of that idea, it completely falls flat. This book just feels like a bunch of randomness. R.L. Stine seems to think that because it's a comic book or superhero story, anything can happen, anything goes. But that's not always the case. We need at least some kind of explanation or logic or sort of rules to follow, in my opinion. But no, these comic book and superhero type stories, this one being no exception, it just feels completely random. It's just a bunch of random scenes and just randomness thrown together. I don't know how else to explain it. And it just was not that good. So yeah, I don't know. This book was not for me. It gets a flat 2 out of 5 stars. Yeah, it's the Wizard of Ooze. Okay, coming in at number 12 on my ranking is When the Ghost Dog Howls. This is book number 13 in the series. And I do have a couple positives for this book. This one, I really like the HorrorLand section in. So this is part of Art 2, where the kids start out in HorrorLand, and then the story will proceed with like the main plot. The HorrorLand section of this one is really cool. Basically, 2 main characters are in like this circus tent, I think, and they're a part of this clown act. It's pretty dark and disturbing. These clowns are basically juggling like these shrunken heads, and then the kids turn to look, and the audience is filled with these zombies, and these zombies start like chasing after the kids. It was pretty scary. I really liked the opening section of this book. I thought it was pretty cool. And then I also did enjoy the concept of this one. Basically, they take like this dog's tooth out of the shop during like the opening section, the souvenir shop or whatever it is. And there's this sort of old folk legend tied to this dog's tooth where there's this ghost dog that will seek out and like hunt down whoever the owner of this dog's tooth is. So throughout this book, there's basically this dog kind of like pursuing the kids. However, that's not really what the main story is about. I mean, it kind of is, but it doesn't focus on that very much. Basically, this dog's tooth is also kind of like magical. It has sort of like these magical properties to it, to where the kids can grant these wishes and the dog tooth will make these wishes come true, kind of. And it turns into more of a be careful what you wish for type story, which I did not like at all. You basically just have the main characters fighting over this dog's tooth, making these just random wishes, and then of course the wishes have consequences, as they always do in these types of stories. And then every once in a while there will be a scene where they might hear like a dog howling in the distance, and the ghost dog will be, sort of coming after them or coming closer, searching for his lost tooth. And then there's also a lot of fake out scares in this one, which I did not like. And there's also a dream sequence in this book that's like 5 freaking chapters long. Yeah, there's like something that happens in the book. and it just goes on forever and ever, and then it turns out that it was all just a dream. I hated that. That made me want to just rip this book into shreds. I can't stand when books do that. So yeah, When the Ghost Dog Howls also gets a flat 2 out of 5 stars. And again, I kind of like the concept for this one, but the execution was terrible. So yeah. Okay, these next couple of picks in my ranking are probably going to be hot takes. You guys are probably going to hate me for this if you've read this series, if you've read these books. I'm just going to peel the Band-Aid off. I'm just going to get this out of the way. So coming in at number 11 on my ranking is Creep from the Deep. This is the third book in the Deep Trouble series. It's a direct sequel to those two. It has the same characters in here, Billy Deep and his sister Sheena, I think her name is. And this is one that I can see people enjoying. It just wasn't for me. I mentioned earlier about these books, it being kind of a detriment with the main story being shortened quite a bit, only being like 80 to 90 pages long. And you really feel it in this one, I think. This book is just like too fast-paced and feels too rushed. And it doesn't give you time to get like attached to these characters or get immersed in the story at all. There's really not much description. It's just all just like constant action. And it just feels just too rushed. I don't know how else to put it. And some of them I think are more rushed than others. This is one that just, feels way too fast-paced. So yeah, Creep from the Deep, I gave it a flat 2 out of 5 stars. I didn't hate it. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't my cup of tea. So yeah, comes in at number 11 on my ranking. And I know this is probably a hot take because from what I've seen, this is one of the more popular books in the series. All right, hot take number 2, incoming. At number 10 on my ranking is Scream of the Haunted Mask. I know there's some of you out there right now that probably like want to reach through the screen and like punch me in the face for putting this book so low. And I will share just kind of the same sentiments I had towards Creep from the Deep for this one. And another thing too that I didn't like about this one is it didn't really feel in line with the previous Haunted Mask books from the original series. This one is also a direct sequel, but it just feels a lot more childish and just not nearly as well written. And yeah, I just couldn't get behind it. It just, not for me. Sorry. That's Scream of the Haunted Mask coming in at number 10. Those books were also like a flat 2 out of 5 stars. Okay, coming in at number 9 on my ranking, we have Help, We Have Strange Powers. I kind of like this cover too. This is a pretty cool cover. And this is also another superhero type story. This is the third book in the series that is like a comic book superhero type story. So yeah. And this is definitely the strongest out of those three, but I still didn't really care for it all that much. Let me see. I gave it a 2.25 out of 5. It's basically these two main characters that discover that they have these powers. And I think there's like some kind of government agency or some kind of secret organization that learns about these kids and their powers and like captures them and wants to like run tests on them or something, or like, I don't remember. I've already forgotten a lot of the details for this one. It was okay. I didn't hate it, but it wasn't really that good either. 2.25 out of 5. Yeah. Help, We Have Strange Powers. Okay. Next one also gets a 2.25 out of 5. Coming in at number 8 on my ranking is The Streets of Panic Park. This is book number 12 in the HorrorLand series. And this one is the last book, I believe, of the first arc of HorrorLand. So this book is basically the culmination of the entire Arc 1. Arc 1's overarching story, where all of the characters meet up. They're trapped in Horrorland, and they have to try to figure out how to escape. And there's also this second theme park called Panic Park that existed like long before Horrorland. The kids like travel back in time to this place called Panic Park. It's like a second Horrorland kind of, and they have to try to figure out how to escape that one. And like a lot of these other Horrorland books, I'll be honest, these just kind of are just in one ear and out the other. A lot of the details have already left in my memory. I remember thinking this was okay, but kind of a disappointing way to end things. I didn't like the way it ended. It just, yeah. The execution wasn't the best. The idea was cool. The concept is all there, but it just suffers from a little bit of poor execution, in my opinion. So that's The Streets of Panic Park. I don't really have a whole lot to say about that one. Okay, coming in at number 7 on my ranking is The Horror at Chiller House. This is book number 19, the final book in the HorrorLand series and the last book of Art 2. And kind of like The Streets of Panic Park, this is also the last book, or the book that's like takes all of the overarching stories in Art 2 and kind of puts them together in this finale. And in this one, the kids once again all wind up in Horrorland, and you have the villain that you see here on the cover. His name is Jonathan Chiller. And this one also has a cool concept to it. It starts out very dark and kind of scary. You basically have Jonathan Chiller gathering all of these kids, trapping them in Horrorland, and telling them that they have to go on this scavenger hunt and find these different little treasure chests with these miniature like horror action figures inside them. And if they don't find them, they're going to be trapped in Horrorland. And there's also a twist where they are going to be hunted by Jonathan Chiller with a crossbow during the scavenger hunt. Yes, he is literally hunting kids with a crossbow. Which is pretty kind of violent and dark for these types of books. So yeah, I thought that was kind of cool. However, this book, again, it's kind of the same criticism I have with this one as with a lot of the other ones. It just feels sort of rushed. And even though this is a full-length Goosebumps book, it's like 130 pages, it still felt like there was too much going on here. It felt very fast-paced, very rushed at the end. And the resolution, the way the kids resolve things, they defeat Jonathan Chiller and escape Horrorland, it is completely bogus in my opinion. It was just so dumb. The climax was horrible in this book, and such a disappointing ending. I just did not like the way things were resolved and the way the book ended. It felt so rushed. I think R.L. Stine was like running out of ideas, and it felt like this should have either been longer or maybe stretched out into 2 books, like the first arc was. The finale books was like 2 books technically, and this one is just 1. So yeah, I gave this one a 2.25 out of 5 as well. So yeah, that's the final book in the HorrorLand series, The Horror at Chiller House. Okay, coming in at number 6 on my ranking is Monster Blood for Breakfast. I gave this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars, so like a slight step up from the previous books I mentioned. And this is book number 3 in the HorrorLand series. And I will say that this one was okay. We're starting to get into the territory now where the rest of these books, I don't mind at least. And then obviously my top few, which I'll get to, I really enjoyed those. But yeah, I didn't mind this book. I thought it was fine enough for what it was. I got some enjoyment out of, but it's not like a big favorite for me. I definitely don't think it's as good as the previous Monster Blood books in the series. Obviously, the first one is one of my all-time favorites. Some of the sequels aren't really the best. I will admit this is actually probably a more solid story than like Monster Blood 4, let's say. That one is kind of rough. It's more of a guilty pleasure type of book. But yeah, this one is okay. 2.5 out of 5 stars. That's Monster Blood for Breakfast. Okay, coming in at number 5 on my ranking is Escape from Horrorland. This is book number 11 in the series, and this is the first part of like the finale of Arc 1. Where the kids are all trapped in Horrorland. And I also gave this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And I also thought it was okay. Again, strong concept here. I like the idea of these overarching stories. It had a lot of potential. And I still enjoyed it for what it was. It just was a bit flawed and didn't have the strongest execution. So yeah, that's Escape from Horrorland. Coming in at number 5 on my ranking. Okay. We are down to the final 4 books in my ranking of the series, and we are finally onto the category of the books that I actually consider to be good / very good. So yeah, not the greatest series. The rest, pretty forgettable in my opinion. But these next 4 books I'll be talking about, I all quite enjoyed these, to varying degrees a little bit, but I enjoyed all of these books. So coming in at number 4 in my ranking is Say Cheese and Die Screaming. This is book number 8 in the series, part of Arc 1 of HorrorLand. And this book is actually really good. I think this is a much better sequel to the Say Cheese and Die franchise than the previous one, Say Cheese and Die Screaming from the original series. This one has some actual pretty dark and scary stuff to it. It's got very interesting lore and backstory to the camera and how it came into existence. Honestly, I think this one even gives the original Say Cheese and Die book a little bit of a run for its money. Like, this is right up there with the original in my opinion. I will admit I'm like not a huge fan of the first Say Cheese and Die book. But this one, yeah, this is a pretty solid book. I didn't give it a great rating. I gave it a flat 3 out of 5 stars. Again, because these shorter books really hurt it, I feel. It just feels too rushed. It being only like, and this is one of the shorter ones too. Let me see what it is again. Yeah, the main story of this book is only 86 pages long. So you basically have like 40 pages cut out from this if it were a full-length Goosebumps book. And you can tell, it hurts these books quite a bit. So yeah, but I enjoyed this one. Flat 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was pretty solid. That's Say Cheese and Die Screaming. Alright, we are on to my top 3 books in the HorrorLand series. Coming in at number 3 is My Friends Call Me Monster. This is book number 7 in the series, part of Arc 1. And this is one that I feel like I might be on an island with. I don't really see anyone talk about this book. I don't think this is a popular book that I know about. I never see this book get mentioned at all. And I will admit, it might not be the best, objectively speaking, or, probably far from it. But there's just something about this one that I really enjoy. This is a really fun, like, monster, creature feature type of story. It does kind of go down the route of sort of like, My Teacher is an Alien. It kind of reminds me of that one, the Bruce Coville book. Or like Creature Teacher from Series 2000. It's basically where these kids suspect that their teacher is like up to something. And the main characters and their friends from school, they decide to spy on their teacher, and they discover that has these mysterious alien-looking eggs hiding up in her attic, and she's sitting on these eggs trying to hatch them. And I think what I enjoy about this book is it's super campy. This one is just a lot of fun. It's sort of a dumb fun type of story. It's just got a good blend of humor and horror and like monster action in it, and it's just a really fun book. It's kind of cheesy, but it's just super fun. I give this one like a 3.25 out of 5. I didn't give it a higher rating because I acknowledge it probably isn't one of the best books ever, but I had a lot of fun with it, yeah. That's My Friends Call Me Monster. Okay, we are on to my top 2, and I will say, before I reveal what they are, that it was very tough to decide between these. I gave both of them a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I had a hard time deciding which one was my top favorite. I like both of these books kind of equally, but for different reasons. So, what I settled on is for number 2, we have Heads You Lose. This is book number 15 and takes place in Arc 2 of the HorrorLand series. And this one is kind of a rewritten version of A Night in Terror Tower. You basically have the 2 main characters that have this sort of magical coin that takes them back in time to this sort of medieval time and landscape where they're in this village and there's this castle and there's this sort of headless prince that's kind of like ruling this castle, I guess. I mean, not really because he's headless. And it's pretty gruesome the way it describes it. It describes like his gory like neck and how it's like scabbed over and everything. It describes it in quite explicit detail and it's kind of gruesome. And the prince has these assistants. One of them is like a wizard, and then another one is, I don't know, like a duke or something, or a knight, or I don't know. I forget the terminology and the different, titles that they give the knights and princes or whatever. But anyway, there's like this wizard and like this knight or something. And then there's also this executioner that is kind of like pursuing these kids and trying to capture them. And so yeah, it has a lot of parallels to A Night in Terror Tower. But the main plot of this one is they are tasked with finding the prince's lost head. His enemies like decapitated him. Somehow he's still alive. I think by the powers of like the wizard or something like that. So this one kind of has like a dark fantasy element to it, which I really like. I really like fantasy. Even though I don't read like a ton of fantasy novels, I do like the idea of fantasy, and I like elements of that in my stories. So this one appealed to me a lot. I really enjoyed this one. It also has some good humor to it, some pretty good atmosphere to it, and some genuinely scary moments. There's some creepy stuff in this book. So yeah, this was basically like these kids just going on a scavenger hunt, trying to find the prince's lost head, and then I think if they return to the prince with his lost head, the prince will let them go home back to their own time. And yeah, this book was a lot of fun. And even though it's kind of a ripoff of A Night in Terror Tower, I'll be honest, I think I like this one slightly more than that. I know A Night in Terror Tower is kind of iconic in a sort of a fan favorite among some of the Goosebumps community, but I think this book is slightly better. That's just my opinion. So yeah, Head You Lose comes in at number 2, my second favorite HorrorLand book. Okay, and my all-time favorite Goosebumps HorrorLand book is Who's Your Mummy? And this is number 6 in the series. And this one was the biggest surprise. I did not go into this book with any sort of expectation. I didn't know much about this. I just went into it expecting a stereotypical mummy story, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I absolutely, well, maybe not quite full on love this book, but close. This is a very entertaining book. And I think what I liked about it is it's not a stereotypical mummy story. The kids don't even go to Egypt. It's very much different from like what you would expect out of like the earlier mummy books in the Goosebumps franchise. Basically, the kids are sent to live with, I think it's their uncle, if I remember correctly, in like Vermont somewhere. And he has like this big house. I think it might be like a mansion or something. Again, the fine details I'm forgetting a little bit, but yeah. They're sent to live with their uncle, and their uncle is fascinated by Egyptian like history and all of that stuff, and he has all of these Egyptian relics around the house, and in his basement I think he has like all of these tombs and like mummies and things like that. And one day the kids, the characters of this story, figure out that their uncle might not be a good guy after all, or possibly even their real uncle at all, and is involved in some evil rituals, I guess you could say. I'm kind of like treading lightly here because I don't want to give too much of the story away. And there's some pretty gruesome and gross things that their uncle does involving the mummies, things he does to them and does with them. And there's some, pretty nasty stuff in here. And it was such a surprise. I'm remaining very vague. I don't want to give anything away. This is one that I highly recommend you go and read. This book was awesome. It is very gruesome. This is one of the most violent books in the Goosebumps HorrorLand series, which is a surprise because the majority of this series is very kind of kid-friendly and childish. Like out of all of the series in the Goosebumps franchise, I think this series as a whole, the HorrorLand series, is probably the most tame. There's a few exceptions. I think the last Goosebumps book, The Horror at Chiller House, where Jonathan Chiller is chasing them with the crossbow, that was kind of messed up. And then you have some messed up moments in Head You Lose with the decapitated prince. There's some moments here and there, but overall, this is a very tame, very kid-friendly series compared to the rest of the Goosebumps franchise, especially like Series 2000. But this book, it has some pretty gruesome stuff in it, and I think that's what I liked about it. And I also liked that it had a unique twist with the whole mummy theme, instead of just going down the typical route where the kids go to Egypt and they discover the tombs and the pyramids and the mummy comes to life. This one is very unique, very refreshing, and it also has a great, I think, climax and then twist ending, and it feels like an overall pretty satisfying book. And the reason I only gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, for as much as I'm praising this, is it just kind of falls to the same shortcomings that these other books did in the series, where it feels a bit rushed. It kind of hurts the book being shorter than the rest of them. Again, this book is only like 90 pages, I think, with the main story. And just in general, I'm not a huge fan of this series, but yeah, I still greatly enjoyed this one. A 3.5 out of 5 stars. That's still a pretty good rating coming from me. So yeah, that is my number 1 favorite book in the Goosebumps HorrorLand series. Who's Your Mummy? Again, this is book number 6 in the series. And I also do kind of like that cover. It's a pretty cool cover art too. The creepy mummy ringing a doorbell. He's got the red glowing eye. So yeah, this is a pretty good book. Alright, that is my ranking for the Goosebumps HorrorLand series. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below if you've read any of these books. As usual, I'm always curious to hear what your opinions are, what your favorite or least favorite books are. Please let me know down below. That is all I have for today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the future with more House of Shivers Goosebumps reviews, and eventually, whenever that series is finished, I will do a ranking for that one. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time.